Chers auditeurs,
dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome to Comme d'Archi Podcast Season 6.
Saison 6, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
And in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Deponte, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne-Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci.
Thank you
D'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
to be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Hello, dear listeners. This is Esther on behalf of Anne-Charlotte. It's great to be back with you today for a new Comme d'Archi devoted to architecture and the law in France, an issue that can be useful to all, in which we bring you the point of view of an eminent French specialist. Baptiste Gibert is a lawyer for architects. He is also sole partner of Paris-based Michel Huet et Associés, a renowned firm whose founder is now deceased. Today, Baptiste Gibert continues the firm's activities in the spirit of its founder. Point 1. Anchoring. Baptiste Gibert's desire for justice arose in New Orleans after his scientific baccalaureate, a diploma which, in principle, opens all doors to French universities, but, nevertheless not knowing what to do, he spent a year in the USA in New Orleans. The trip gave him time to think. An American lawyer next door opened the doors of his world to him. He took him to the courthouse, to hearings. On his return to France, he applied for a law degree at the University of Sceaux and joined the course, which he immediately appreciated. His career trajectory was definitely set in motion. But beyond these facts, a desire for justice remained secretly anchored deep in Baptiste Gibert's heart. After all, his disabled older sister was regularly confronted with discrimination. This personal experience is the anchor, this deep-rooted sense of injustice, which took shape and grew thanks to this American neighbor. Point 2. Law and architecture. Baptiste Gibert is passionate about architectural law. But why? This law dedicated to architecture is not taught at French university. It is also less remunerative. And yet, Baptiste Gibert's specialization is based on a human story, and more precisely on his meeting with Michel Huet. Previously specializing in public law and public business law, he holds a Master 2 in procedure and wants to be a lawyer. He met Michel Huet when he joined his agency for his first job. He recalls a gigantic office in the 16th arrondissement of Paris. They were 40 years apart. At the time, Michel Huet was an authority. He has a thirst for sharing. He's not afraid of transferring skills. Baptiste Gibert fulfilled his role as a young collaborator, and the years went by, staying on through the best and worst years of the business. Whatever happens, they see it through together. They became partners. Michel Huet worked until the end of his life. He passed away 3 years ago. Baptiste Gibert goes solo. He hadn't expected so much, so quickly. A lawyer at 25 through hard work, a partner at 30. He believes in the power of hard work. For Baptiste Gibert, law is not raw, as is commonly believed, but a scientifically minded subject. Here, the major rule is the law, the minor rule is the facts. Then, the postulate of how the facts will be taken by the law is the essential question. It's a way of thinking. The firm specializes in architectural law. On the one hand, there's urban planning, real estate, and construction law. On the other, there's intellectual property, i.e. copyright. Around 70% of the firm's clients are architects, and 30% are both professionals and private individuals. Baptiste Gibert explains, and I quote, "My project as an architect's lawyer is always to defend architectural ethics, which I can define as the moral rules surrounding architecture. Architects are subject to a number of legal and ethical rules. I'm always looking to ensure that these rules are respected. This implies that sometimes I am against an architect who has failed in his duties, contractual or ethical obligations. End of quote. Architects are full of ideas, says Baptiste Gibert, but an idea has to be put into practice. And it's only when an idea is put into practice that it can be protected. This is part of what he teaches at the Rouen School of Architecture and at the Paris Est Incubator. The legal basics. Contracts are the key to good work. Remember, anything can be negotiated. That's why you need to read everything, because everything is negotiable. The first point of the contract is what is the deliverable and how much is the fee. Maître Gibert assists architects in contractualization, whether for a full or partial assignment. When there's a job to be done, it's important to take the right direction. To each his own. Acceptance of the work is a very important stage and must be treated with the utmost seriousness. Finally, the architect's entire practice is potentially subject to legal scrutiny. Intellectual property is the other very complex aspect. The architect is an artist whose original creation, by default, can't be protected. A work is original if it shows the architect's personality. This is the first thing to know. A set of clues is given to ensure the originality of the work. Originality gives rise on the one hand to the author's moral rights and on the other to the author's economic rights. The author's moral rights are attached to the author of the work. They are inalienable, non-transferable, and non-prescriptible. After death, this right is transmitted to the heirs for 70 years. It protects against distortion of the work. It is the administrative judge who determines whether the distortion is justified. The infringement must be recognized. Namely, in French law, demolition is not a denaturation. It's a disappearance, and it's not treated in the same way in law. The supervisory ministry is the Ministry of Culture. The ministry should be more involved with architects and the protection of works of art. The INSEE Tower, an emblematic example, has been knocked down. The Butte Rouge will be extensively transformed. The Tour Troisième is another example of the destruction of 20th century heritage. Another aspect of copyright is the right of reproduction and the right of representation, i.e. the one concerned. In the case of private or cultural use, there is no problem in reproducing the work. Commercial use, on the other hand, is subject to copyright. When it comes to dealing with the history of a building or relating the work of an architect, as a pen, you have to be able to demonstrate what you're saying. But that stops after 70 years. The Eiffel Tower is an interesting example, because today you can sell a photo of it, but not its illuminations, which are still protected. The distribution of images is subject to a distribution right. Of course, there is freedom of panorama. But when images are used for commercial purposes, copyright must be respected. Rights must be paid and the authors mentioned. Today, ethics in architecture are a must. You have to make sure your rights are respected even more. And you mustn't sell off your fees. Cabinet Michel, Huet et Associés is a niche structure. It operates with a staff of 4. Availability, listening, and honesty are important values. Baptiste Gibert speaks directly to his customers. The initial question is, what do you want? This is the most important question. Depending on the answer, the lawyer adapts and advises accordingly. Their work with architects and project owners is based on a relationship of mutual trust. The contract is the law of the parties. When faced with pressure, you need to stand back. A lawyer's role is to appease, and he is independent of any corporation, so he can act in complete freedom. For example, the firm worked on the Château de Villers-Cotterêts, now the Cité Internationale de la Langue Française, the second most important historical work-in-progress monument after Notre Dame. A highly sensitive subject. Maître Gibert adds, In mid-November, I was in Kuala Lumpur at the International Forum of the International Union of Architects, which I advise. This allows me to internationalize our practice by meeting architects from all over the world. A truly global vision of architecture. I'm also a member of AFEX, which I support when necessary. It's a great association which is doing remarkable work currently in Saudi Arabia. End of quote. In conclusion, Maître Gibert asserts that artificial intelligence will not replace lawyers. As for young people, they understand what's at stake. Of course, you have to be curious about everything, have a critical eye, and look at architecture abroad. Faced with the current situation, Maître Gibert stresses that you have to be in the twilight of your loss to react. He remains optimistic. The most important thing for architects is to trust each other. The responsibility today is overwhelming. Have confidence is his final word. Dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. Let's meet again next week for a new Com d'Archi in English. And until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening.
And thanks to the sound engineer who was collaborating with us today.
Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at Com d'Archi Podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.